They always tell you that blood is thicker than water. It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? It implies an unbreakable bond, a safety net of love and loyalty that will catch you whenever the world decides to push you down. But what they don't tell you is that to your own family, that phrase is often used as a weapon. It's the foundational lie my parents whispered in my ear every single time they wanted to bleed me dry. For 28 long years, I chose to believe them. I genuinely believed that family required unconditional sacrifice, even if it meant setting your own dreams on fire just to keep someone else warm. But there is a definitive point where sacrifice stops being noble. There's a line where it simply becomes a matter of survival. And once you cross that line, you realize that the people who gave you life can also be the very ones trying to destroy it. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday evening in late October when my parents summoned me to their house. I remember the weather vividly because the relentless downpour against the windshield of my car felt like an omen. My mother had called me 3 times that afternoon, her voice trembling, refusing to give me any details over the phone. "Just come home, David, please. It's your brother," she had pleaded before hanging up. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the atmosphere in the living room was instantly suffocating. The air was thick, heavy, and reeked of a cheap, practiced theatrical tension. The lights were dimmed low. My mother, Eleanor, was sitting on the edge of the floral armchair, weeping silently into a crumpled, tear-soaked tissue. Her shoulders shook with a rhythmic, perfect grief that looked almost rehearsed. My father, Arthur, sat rigidly in his favorite leather wingback chair. He looked exceptionally stern, his jaw tightly clenched, holding a heavy manila folder in his lap like a loaded weapon. And then there was Leo, my younger brother, the undisputed golden child of the family. He was sitting carelessly on the velvet sofa, his legs crossed, looking entirely unbothered as he scrolled rapidly through his phone. He didn't even look up when the front door clicked shut. Leo was 24, but he had spent his entire life being treated like a fragile prince who could do absolutely no wrong, even when he left a devastating trail of emotional and financial destruction in his wake. "Sit down, David," my father commanded. His voice didn't carry warmth. It echoed with an unyielding, heavy authority that instantly made me feel like an accused criminal standing before a judge. I walked over and sat on the small wooden chair opposite them, maintaining my distance. "What's going on, Dad?" Mom was hysterical on the phone. "Is everyone okay?" Before I could even finish my sentence, my father tossed the heavy manila folder onto the mahogany coffee table. It landed with a loud, echoing thud. "Leo is in severe trouble," my father stated flatly, his eyes locking onto mine with an intense, demanding glare. "He made some unfortunate business investments. He partnered with some incredibly shady, aggressive lenders. If we don't clear his name and liquidate his liabilities immediately, they are going to launch a massive lawsuit against him. It will ruin his credit forever, strip away his assets, and he might even face significant prison time for corporate non-compliance. He needs exactly $100,000 cash by the end of this week." I blinked, completely stunned by the sheer gravity of the number. $100,000? "That's terrible," I said softly, genuinely trying to process the scale of Leo's failure. I looked over at Leo, expecting to see panic, shame, or at least a shred of remorse on his face. But he just tapped his screen, his face illuminated by the blue light of his phone, completely detached from the conversation. "But Dad, why am I here? I'm incredibly sorry Leo messed up again, but I don't have that kind of disposable cash lying around. I work a regular corporate marketing job." My mother stopped her crying instantly. The theatrical tears vanished from her eyes, replaced by a sudden, cold, and deeply calculating stare. She leaned forward, resting her hands on her knees. "Yes, you do have the money, David. Don't lie to us," my mother said, her voice dropping all pretense of grief. "We know you have exactly $112,000 sitting in your high-yield savings account right now. We need you to walk into your bank tomorrow morning and transfer $100,000 of it directly into Leo's checking account." The room fell dead silent. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with an agonizingly slow, rhythmic beat, sounding like a countdown timer to an explosion. They weren't asking for my assistance. They weren't asking for a loan. They were demanding my entire life's work. To understand why I didn't just stand up, throw that folder back in my father's face, and walk out of that house right then, you have to understand the toxic history of my childhood. In my family, there were very clear, unwritten rules. Leo was the investment. I was the insurance policy. I was always designated as the dependable one, the strong one, the mature one. But as I grew older, I realized that in a dysfunctional household, words like dependable and mature are just polite, manipulative synonyms for a doormat. From the moment Leo was born, he was bathed in a spotlight of unconditional adoration. When he was in high school, he failed 3 of his classes because he chose to skip school and party. My parents didn't punish him. Instead, they hired a private tutor costing $60 an hour and blamed the school system for failing to understand Leo's unique creative mind. When Leo turned 16, my father bought him a brand new sports car. Within 3 months, Leo crashed that car into a concrete barrier while racing a friend. He walked away without a scratch, but the car was a total loss. My parents didn't yell, they didn't take away his license, they simply filed an insurance claim, paid the deductible, and bought him an even better, faster car the following weekend because they didn't want Leo to suffer from vehicular trauma. My life, on the other hand, was an entirely different story. I was the older brother, which meant I was responsible for everything and entitled to nothing. When I was in college, I worked 2 exhausting jobs, one at a local grocery store stocking shelves until 2 a.m., and another as a campus library assistant, just to afford my own textbooks and groceries. My parents had fully funded Leo's tuition at an expensive out-of-state university, but when it came to me, my father told me that taking out student loans builds character and instills financial discipline. I remember a specific incident during my junior year when I woke up with an excruciating, blinding pain in my jaw. My wisdom teeth were severely infected and impacted. The dental surgery was going to cost $1,400, money I simply did not have. I called my father, swallowing my pride, begging him for a temporary loan. He listened to me groan in pain over the phone, sighed heavily, and coldly told me to tough it out until my university student insurance kicked in the following semester. He told me they were tight on cash. 2 days later, I checked Facebook only to see a post from my mother bragging about the luxury cruise she and my father had just booked for Leo's spring break. I spent my entire adult life desperately trying to buy their love. I was caught in a psychological trap, believing that if I just worked harder, if I became more successful, if I remained completely obedient and silent, they would finally look at me with the exact same pride and affection they showered on Leo without a single thought. And now, sitting in this familiar, suffocating living room, the ultimate test of my obedience was being laid out on the table. "Mom, Dad," I stammered, my hands starting to shake violently as the sheer horror of their request began to settle into my bones. "That money, you don't understand, that is my entire life. I've worked 80-hour weeks for 7 agonizing years to build that account. I've lived in a cramped, dark, moldy studio apartment eating instant ramen. I haven't taken a vacation in a decade. I've skipped weddings, birthdays, and social lives just to ensure I could finally buy a home, to finally start my own actual life. You are asking me to throw away my future for a mistake Leo made?" My father didn't flinch. His face didn't soften with a single shred of paternal empathy. Instead, he slammed his heavy fist onto the mahogany table with such sudden, explosive violence that the glass coasters rattled and spun across the wood. "Your own biological brother's life and freedom are on the line, and you're standing here talking about a house?" my father roared, his eyes widening with absolute rage. Your goddamn loyalty, David. We gave you life. We clothed you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head when you were a helpless child. And now, when your family faces a crisis, you want to watch your own flesh and blood get dragged away to a prison cell just because you are a greedy, selfish little miser? Family helps family, David, my mother added, her voice dropping into a venomous, sharp hiss that cut deeper than my father's shouting. This isn't an option. If you choose to walk out of that door tonight without agreeing to help your brother, you are completely dead to this family. We will legally disown you. We will scrub your name from our lives. You will no longer be welcome in our home, at our holidays, or in our presence. You will be entirely alone in this world. Is a piece of real estate really worth losing your mother and father? The psychological weight of her words completely crushed me. It was a masterful display of emotional blackmail, fine-tuned over decades of manipulation. The deep-seated, childhood fear of being entirely abandoned, of being validated as the bad son, was an overwhelming, terrifying prospect that short-circuited my rational brain. Leo finally looked up from his phone. He tilted his head back, looking at me with a pathetic, wide-eyed pout that I had seen him use 1,000 times whenever he wanted to escape the consequences of his actions. Please, David, he whined, his voice dripping with a calculated, helpless vulnerability. I swear to God, if you just save me this one time, I'll change. I'll get my life together. I'll pay you back every single cent, with interest, the moment my new project launches. I promise on my life, man. Please don't let them lock me up. Against every single rational instinct screaming inside my gut, against the quiet voice in the back of my mind telling me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, I gave in. I nodded slowly, the tears finally spilling over my eyelids. Fine, I whispered, the word feeling like ash in my mouth. Fine, I'll do it. The relief in the room was instant, but it wasn't a relief born of gratitude. It was the smug satisfaction of a predator that had successfully cornered its prey. My father immediately picked up the folder, my mother went back to sipping her tea, and Leo casually looked back down at his phone, his pathetic face instantly vanishing back into absolute indifference. The next morning, with a bleeding heart and a completely hollow, sickening feeling in my stomach, I walked into the local branch of my bank. I stood at the counter, signed the paperwork, and watched as a digital line of code transferred $100,000, 7 years of my sweat, tears, anxiety, and sacrificed youth, straight out of my life and into Leo's checking account. For the next month, I lived like a walking ghost. The emotional and physical toll of what I had done completely hollowed me out. My savings account, which had once represented my freedom and my hard-earned security, was completely decimated. The suburban house that I had finally put a formal offer on was gone. I had to breach the contract, causing me to forfeit my $5,000 earnest money deposit as well. I was trapped in my tiny, dark, suffocating studio apartment, staring at the ceiling for hours, working constant double shifts at my corporate job just to try and rebuild my life from absolute zero. But during those dark nights, I comforted myself with one recurring, desperate thought. I saved my brother. I saved my family from ruin. Surely they will finally see my worth. Surely the next time I see them, they will look at me with respect, with gratitude, with the love I have been begging for my entire life. 6 weeks after the transfer, my mother called me. Her voice was bright, cheerful, and entirely detached from the trauma of our last encounter. She was inviting me over for a massive family barbecue. Your aunt and uncle are coming into town, and we're celebrating your father's recent business contract. You must come, David. It's been too long, she chirped. I didn't really want to go. Every part of my body told me to stay away, but that pathetic, lingering desire for family inclusion won again. I thought that maybe this barbecue would be the moment they publicly thanked me. Maybe they would acknowledge the massive sacrifice I had made to keep our family name intact. When I pulled up to my parents' suburban driveway in my dented, rusted 10-year-old economy sedan, my heart suddenly stopped. My jaw literally dropped as I stared through the windshield. Parked right in the center of the driveway, gleaming under the bright afternoon sun, was a pristine, brand-new metallic blue BMW M4. It was a high-performance luxury sports car, complete with custom carbon fiber trim and blacked-out rims. It was a vehicle that cost at bare minimum $85,000 cash. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in my stomach. I turned off my ignition, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I forced myself out of the car and walked slowly around the side of the house toward the backyard, where the sound of loud laughter and clinking glasses echoed over the fence. The moment I stepped onto the patio, the scene before me made my blood run cold. There was Leo, standing proudly by the premium outdoor grill, wearing a brand new designer leather jacket and a flashing gold Swiss watch. He was surrounded by our cousins and uncles, laughing loudly, gesturing animatedly as he described the specifications of his new ride. My parents were standing right next to him, their faces absolutely beaming with a radiant, nauseating pride. "David, you finally made it," my mother chirped, waving a hand at me from across the lawn. She didn't walk over to hug me. She barely glanced at my face before turning her attention right back to whatever joke Leo was telling. I didn't smile. I didn't greet my relatives. I walked straight across the grass, my eyes locked entirely on my brother. "Whose car is parked right in front in the driveway?" I asked, my voice dangerously low, trying with every ounce of my remaining strength to control the violent trembling in my chest. Leo stopped laughing. A slow, incredibly smug and arrogant smirk spread across his face. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his expensive craft beer, looking down his nose at me. "Oh, that's my new baby, Dave. Metallic blue, twin-turbo inline-six. A guy's gotta ride in style if he's gonna make moves in this city, right?" I felt the blood rush violently to my ears, a loud, roaring static sound filling my head. "Your car?" I spoke louder, my voice cracks revealing the raw agony underneath. "Leo, 6 weeks ago you were supposedly on the verge of being sued into oblivion. You were going to jail over $100,000 debt to shady lenders. I gave you my entire life savings, money I earned through blood, sweat, and tears to save your life from ruin. How on earth do you have a brand new luxury sports car?" The backyard conversation instantly died. My cousins lowered their cups. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a tense, heavy awkwardness. My father's face turned from joyful to a dark, furious scowl within a fraction of a second. He stepped tightly between me and Leo, using his large frame to shield the golden child from my gaze. "Keep your voice down, David," my father barked in a harsh, commanding whisper, his eyes darting toward our relatives. "Do not cause an embarrassing, petty scene in front of our guests. Leo managed his personal finances exceptionally well the last month. A very close business associate of his stepped in, helped him clear up some logistical issues, and he deserved a proper reward for going through such an incredibly stressful ordeal. He needed a fresh start." "A fresh start?" I yelled, completely past the point of caring who heard me, past the point of protecting their precious family reputation. "With my money? I am living in a moldy studio apartment eating garbage because I gave him $100,000, and you bought him an $85,000 sports car as a reward for being incompetent?" My mother snapped. She stepped around my father, her face twisted into a mask of pure, vicious venom. She got so close to my face I could smell her expensive perfume.
It wasn't your money, David. You gave it as an unconditional gift to your family," my mother hissed, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "Stop being so incredibly, systematically jealous of your younger brother's success. You have always been a bitter, bean-counting, miserable little man. Leo has a bright, grand future, and if you are going to bring your pathetic, toxic negativity to our home and ruin his celebration, you can turn right back around and leave this house immediately."
I looked around the backyard. My uncles looked away, refusing to make eye contact. My cousins looked amused, whispers already breaking out among them. And Leo just stood by the grill, raised his expensive beer glass toward me, and flashed a silent, mocking victory toast. In that exact moment, the final illusion of my childhood was violently ripped away. The veil dropped. I realized with absolute, terrifying certainty that I was never a son to them. I was never a brother. I was an asset. I was an ATM. I was a safety net designed to be used, abused, and discarded the moment the golden child needed another toy. I didn't say another word. I turned on my heel, walked back down the driveway, got into my rusted sedan, and drove away into the dark. Tears of blinding, suffocating rage blurred my vision, but beneath the tears, a new feeling was taking root. A cold, hard, unyielding steel was forming in my heart. They wanted a monster? They were about to get one. The universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it waits until you are at your absolute lowest point before handing you the exact weapon you need to tear down the walls of your oppressors. For 2 weeks after that barbecue, I maintained absolute radio silence. I blocked my parents' numbers, I blocked Leo, and I focused entirely on my work. And then fate handed me a wild card. It was a Thursday morning when my desk phone rang. It was my father. He was calling from his corporate line, completely ignoring the explosive blowout at the barbecue as if it had never even occurred. His voice wasn't angry, it was completely frantic, panicked, and strained. "Listen to me very carefully. I am currently out of state on a critical multi-million-dollar corporate business trip. I just realized that I accidentally left an extremely sensitive, confidential corporate tax folder sitting directly on top of my home office desk. The federal courier is arriving at the house in exactly 45 minutes to pick it up and overnight it to the auditors. You still have the spare emergency key to the front door. I need you to leave your office right now, drive over to the house, grab that folder from my desk and hand it to the courier. Do not fail me, David. My entire company's compliance is on the line." Under normal circumstances, I would have laughed and hung up the phone, but the moment he said those words, a strange, burning, predatory curiosity compelled me. A voice in the back of my mind told me that there was a reason he was panicking this badly. "Fine, Dad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and compliant. "I'll handle it." "Good, hurry," he snapped before hanging up. I left my office, got into my car, and drove over to my parents' suburban neighborhood. The house was completely empty. My mother was out at her weekly country club luncheon. I walked up the porch, inserted the emergency key into the deadbolt, and heard the heavy click of the door unlocking. The house was dead quiet, smelling of expensive mahogany polish and vanilla candles. I walked upstairs, down the long hallway, and pushed open the heavy double doors into my father's private home office. It was a grand room, lined with bookshelves and legal documents. I walked over to the massive executive desk, and sure enough, there was the bright blue corporate tax folder sitting right next to his laptop. I picked it up, intending to leave immediately, but as I turned around to walk out of the room, my heavy winter coat caught the edge of the large, antique, locked wooden organizer box that sat on the very corner of the top shelf. The box wobbled, tipped over, and plummeted to the floor. It hit the hardwood with a massive, echoing crash. The cheap brass latch on the front snapped completely wide open. Dozens of personal financial documents, tax returns, bank statements, and legal files scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. "Damn it," I muttered, kneeling down to quickly gather up the mess before the courier arrived. I began stacking the papers back into an orderly pile, but as I pulled a thick, multi-page document from beneath the edge of the desk, a specific logo at the top of the page caught my eye. It was the official certified crest of Apex Financial Trust, the exact same major banking institution where I held my savings account. What drew my attention, however, was a prominent crimson ink stamp emblazoned across the center of the first page. It read, "Approved and sealed." Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped the document open and began to read the fine print. Within 10 seconds, the air completely left my lungs. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. The document was an official joint equity loan and asset protection application. I flipped to the date of the application. It was dated July 14th, exactly 3 months after my parents had brought me into their living room and forced me to hand over my $100,000. As my eyes scanned down the legal text, the horrifying, gut-wrenching truth began to unveil itself. Leo had never been in debt to shady lenders. He had never been hunted by aggressive creditors. He had never been at risk of going to a prison cell over a bad business investment. The entire story was an elaborate, meticulously crafted, fabricated lie. Instead, 3 months prior, my father and Leo had actively co-signed a massive $250,000 private business loan through Apex Financial Trust. But because Leo's credit was completely non-existent and my father's business assets were already fully leveraged, the bank had required a high-value primary guarantor with a flawless financial history and high liquidity. My father and brother had used my name. They had stolen my social security number. They had completely hijacked my identity behind my back to secure the $250,000 loan. And right there on the primary guarantor's signature line was my name, written in elegant cursive handwriting. It looked terrifyingly identical to my own signature. It was a masterful, chilling forgery. But the document got so much worse. I flipped to the final section of the file, which contained internal bank audit correspondence notes. According to the automated fraud detection system of Apex Financial Trust, the bank had caught a minor digital discrepancy in the forged signature during a routine quarterly audit. They had flagged the account for potential high-value identity theft and had formally threatened to launch a full-scale federal criminal investigation against my father and Leo within 30 days. The only loophole to halt the bank's automated fraud system from escalating the case to the authorities was to make an immediate, massive cash deposit of $100,000 into the account from an authorized family member to manually verify the account's liquidity and satisfy the auditor's requirements. They hadn't begged for my help to save Leo from shady lenders. They had emotionally blackmailed me, exploited my childhood trauma, and stolen my entire life's savings just to cover up the fact that they had committed federal identity fraud against me. They used my money to silence the bank auditors so they could keep the remaining $150,000 of the fraudulent loan, which they used to buy Leo his luxury downtown condo and his brand new metallic blue BMW. I stood in that empty, silent office, holding the paper in my hands. My body had completely stopped trembling. The sadness, the suffocating guilt, the pathetic, lingering desire for their love and approval, it all evaporated into the ether, replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolute razor-sharp rage. Suddenly, the front doorbell rang. The courier had arrived. I didn't panic. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. Keeping my hands perfectly steady,
I laid out the legal bank documents on the desk and took crystal clear, high-resolution, perfectly framed photographs of every single page. I made sure to capture the forged signature, my stolen Social Security number, the internal audit notes, and the crimson bank approval stamps. Once I had everything backed up to my secure cloud server, I carefully stacked the papers back into the broken wooden box, placed it back on the shelf, grabbed the blue corporate tax folder, and walked downstairs. I handed the folder to the courier, smiled warmly, locked the front door behind me, and walked away from that house a completely changed man. I didn't yell. I didn't send an angry text message. I didn't confront them over the phone. I knew that if I showed my cards too early, my father's corporate attorneys would find a loophole. They would destroy the physical documents in that house, deny everything, and turn the entire extended family against me by gaslighting me into oblivion. Instead, I chose to play their game. I spent the next 3 weeks working completely in the shadows, orchestrating a retaliation of absolute legal destruction. First, I took a portion of my remaining $12,000 and hired a top-tier, high-end, independent forensic handwriting analyst who frequently provided expert testimony in federal fraud cases. I provided him with copies of my real signature from my corporate employment contracts and the high-resolution photos of the forged signature on the loan document. Within 48 hours, the analyst issued a certified, ironclad legal report concluding that the signature on the loan was an undeniable amateur forgery created by my father's hand. Next, I retained the services of a ruthless financial defense attorney specializing in high-value corporate identity theft. Together, we scheduled an emergency closed-door meeting with the lead investigator of the local police department's financial crimes division and the corporate fraud directors at Apex Financial Trust. When the bank directors saw the indisputable forensic evidence, alongside the proof that my parents had actively extorted the $100,000 from me under false pretenses to cover up their initial crime, they were absolutely horrified. The bank immediately realized they had been defrauded of $250,000. The police department opened a formal criminal case for first-degree identity theft, grand larceny, and bank fraud. Mr. David, based on this mountain of evidence, we have enough to secure an immediate arrest warrant, the lead detective told me, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the file. We can dispatch officers to their home and business address by tomorrow morning. I sat back in my chair, a slow, cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. "No, detective," I replied, my voice dripping with icy resolve. "Not yet. I don't want them arrested in the dark where they can hide their shame. I want them to know exactly who brought down the gavel, and I want everyone they have ever lied to see it happen." The absolute perfect stage arrived 2 weeks later. It was my parents' 30th anniversary. They had been planning this event for a year. It was designed to be an extravagant, high-society gala hosted at a rented luxury banquet hall downtown. They had invited over 80 guests, our entire extended family, their wealthy country club neighbors, my father's elite corporate clients, and the local business associates whose respect my father valued more than his own life. They wanted to project the ultimate image of a perfect, wealthy, successful American family. 2 days before the event, my mother sent me a cold, formal email, likely forced by my father, who wanted to maintain appearances. "David, it would look highly unusual to the extended family if our eldest son was absent from our 30th anniversary. You are expected to attend. Dress appropriately." I typed a single-word reply. Yes. The grand ballroom of the hotel was absolutely stunning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a glittering light over 80 guests dressed in expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos. Classical music floated through the air, and champagne towers stood on tables lined with white silk.
My parents stood right at the center of the room, soaking in the endless waves of admiration and fake pleasantries. My father, Arthur, looked smug and powerful in his custom tuxedo. My mother, Eleanor, laughed gracefully, showing off her new diamond necklace. And right next to them was Leo, looking incredibly arrogant, loudly bragging to a group of young women about his real estate investments and his new metallic blue BMW parked prominently in the hotel valet. I walked into the ballroom wearing a simple, dark, well-fitted suit. I didn't grab a drink. I didn't mingle. The moment my mother spotted me walking through the entrance, her graceful smile instantly faltered. She excused herself from her friends, hurried across the marble floor, and grabbed my arm in a hushed, sharp, venomous whisper. "What are you doing here, David? And why do you look like you're attending a funeral?" she hissed, her eyes scanning my simple attire. "I thought we made it clear that you aren't welcome to speak to us until you drop that pathetic, jealous attitude about your brother's car." "I'm just here to give you your anniversary present, Mom," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, carrying a serene, terrifying confidence that visibly unnerved her. I pulled my arm away, walked straight past her, and stepped onto the raised grand stage at the front of the ballroom. I walked right up to the podium, picked up the wireless microphone from the stand, and tapped it twice with my index finger. Thud, thud. The loud, bass-heavy sound echoed violently through the premium surround sound speakers of the ballroom. The classical music faded out. The conversations died down. Within 5 seconds, the entire room of 80 high society guests fell dead silent. Every single eye in the room turned to look at me standing on the stage. "Good evening, everyone," I spoke clearly into the microphone, my voice echoing with absolute clarity. "For those of you who don't know me, I am David, Arthur and Eleanor's eldest son. As we all know, my parents are celebrating 30 years of what looks like an absolutely perfect, unblemished marriage, and my younger brother, Leo, is celebrating his incredible, rapid rise into a luxury lifestyle. My parents always spent my childhood teaching me about the value of family. They taught me about sacrifice. They taught me that blood comes first." From the center of the room, my father's face instantly turned from confusion to a deep, dark, furious crimson. He realized I was controlling the room, and his corporate instincts kicked in. He stepped out of the crowd, marching toward the stage, gesturing frantically with his hands. "David, get off that stage right now!" my father roared, his voice booming through the room without the microphone. "Stop this embarrassing, pathetic nonsense! You're drunk! Get down!" I just wanted to share with all of you the ultimate testament to their love, teamwork, and financial brilliance, I continued, completely ignoring his shouting, my voice remaining entirely unshaken. I looked back at the AV control technician sitting at the soundboard at the back of the ballroom. I had paid him a $500 cash tip an hour before the party to swap out the family memories slideshow file. "Tech, please play the anniversary presentation." Suddenly, the massive 30-foot projector screen behind me roared to life. But it wasn't a photo of my parents' wedding day. It wasn't a nostalgic trip down memory lane. It was a giant, crystal-clear, high-definition scan of the Apex Financial Trust secret bank document. Right next to it, filling the other half of the massive screen, was the Certified Forensic Handwriting Analysis Report, highlighting the word forgery in giant, bold red letters, alongside my stolen Social Security number and my father's real signature. A collective, unified gasp violently rippled through the banquet hall. People stood up from their tables, leaning forward, squinting at the screen in absolute disbelief. The whispers started instantly, a chaotic, spreading wildfire of shock and horror. "What is the meaning of this?" my father screamed, finally reaching the edge of the stage, his fists clenched, his veins bulging from his neck like thick cords. "The meaning, Father," I said, my voice cutting through the whispers like a guillotine, "is that you and Leo stole my identity to secure a $250,000 fraudulent loan. You used my name to fund Leo's luxury lifestyle, and then you used emotional blackmail, tears, and threats of disownment to extort my entire life savings, $100,000, just to cover up your federal crimes from the bank auditors." Leo's face went completely, utterly, ghostly white. He stumbled backward into a table, knocking over a tower of champagne glasses that shattered violently against the floor. My mother began to visibly hyperventilate, clutching her diamond necklace as her wealthy country club and neighbors turned to stare at her with expressions of absolute horror, disgust, and mockery. "You ungrateful, malicious little brat!" my father screamed, completely losing his mind, lunging up the steps of the stage to physically attack me. "We built you. We gave you everything. We will ruin your life for this. You have absolutely no proof." "I don't need to prove anything else to you, Dad," I said, softly stepping back from the podium, "because I already proved it to them." Right on cue, the heavy, ornate double doors of the luxury ballroom swung open with a loud thud. 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes criminal detectives walked into the room, their heavy tactical boots echoing loudly against the marble floor. The lead detective walked straight past the crowds of stunned, silent guests, ignoring my mother's gasps, and marched right onto the stage, stepping directly between me and my father. "Arthur Vance and Leo Vance, you are officially under arrest for first-degree grand identity theft, federal bank fraud, grand larceny, and criminal conspiracy. Hands behind your back right now." Leo completely broke down. The arrogant sports car driving prince vanished, replaced by a terrified boy who began openly crying, sobbing, and begging my mother to save him as his hands were violently forced behind his back and clicked into the steel cuffs. My father went completely, utterly rigid. He didn't fight. He stood there, his eyes wide with an absolute paralyzing terror as he realized his reputation, his multi-million-dollar contracts, his high society standing, and his freedom were completely, permanently destroyed in front of everyone who had ever mattered to him. As they were being led out of the grand ballroom in handcuffs, surrounded by the flashing cameras of local news reporters whom my attorney had carefully tipped off earlier that afternoon, my mother ran up to the stage. Her makeup was completely ruined, tears streaming down her face, her voice hysterical. "David, please stop this madness," she screamed, clutching at the edge of my suit jacket. "They are your father and your brother. They are your own flesh and blood. How could you do something this horrific to your own family?" I looked down at her from the stage. For 28 years, her disapproval would have broken me, but now I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a beautiful, radiant, absolute peace. "You told me a month ago at the barbecue that I was no longer a part of this family, Mom. I guess I finally took your advice. Enjoy the rest of your anniversary." I turned around, walked down the back steps of the stage, and exited the ballroom through the kitchen doors, leaving the chaos behind me. The aftermath of that night was absolute poetic justice. Because the $250,000 loan was legally proven to be entirely fraudulent from its inception, Apex Financial Trust was forced by federal regulations to completely wipe the debt from my name, erasing any negative impact and fully restoring my credit score to a flawless status. Furthermore, under federal victim restitution and asset forfeiture laws, the police department immediately seized and liquidated Leo's luxury downtown condo and his brand new metallic blue BMW M4 to recover the stolen funds. Even better, the $100,000 that they had emotionally extorted from me was legally frozen by the state prosecutor's office during the investigation. 2 months ago, that money was fully, legally transferred back into my high-yield savings account. My father and Leo ended up taking a mandatory plea deal to avoid the absolute maximum federal sentence. However, due to the severity of the bank fraud, my father was sentenced to 7 years in a federal correctional facility and Leo was sentenced to 4 years.
My father's business completely collapsed within a month of his arrest. My mother was forced to sell the suburban family home just to pay off their massive mounting legal fees. She now lives entirely alone in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town, completely shunned and abandoned by the high society country club friends she used to value more than her own son. She tries to call me sometimes. I never pick up. As for me, 2 weeks ago, I finally closed on that beautiful, sunlit 4-bedroom suburban house. It has a massive backyard, a big modern kitchen, and a heavy oak front door. And that front door requires a specific, unique key, a key that my biological family will never, ever possess. I learned the hard way that blood only connects us by biology. It is nothing more than a medical fact. But respect, loyalty, protection, and true love, those are things you actually have to earn. And if you try to burn my entire life down just to build yours, don't be surprised when I step back, fold my arms, and let the flames consume you instead.